My name is John Scott-Railton, and I was the target of an international mercenary spy operation. My work basically focuses on investigating the different digital threats that are pointed at civil society groups. So this means opposition politicians, journalists, government critics, and really anybody who runs afoul of people in power, but who don't really have the resources to protect themselves. What's interesting is that more recently, it seems like a number of actors have become not only curious about the work that Citizen Lab does, but curious enough to pay people to go after us and try to figure out what it is that we're doing and that we may be doing in the future that's not yet public.
In January 2019, John Scott-Railton, also known as JSR, became the target of a mercenary espionage operation. It all started with a friendly yet suspicious email.
And the email is like, "Dear Mr. Scott-Railton, loved your work with kite aerial photography. I'm this, wealthy guy, and I would just love to talk to you about the possibility of using your work in my work, which is sort of like, investment in environmental issues in Africa." And what immediately caught my attention about this message was that some wealthy person was interested in a technology that I had used almost a decade before to do mapping in Dakar, Senegal. And at the time, drones were still a little bit hard to come by, and I was trying to map flooding, so I would put robotic cameras on kites and fly these things above flood zones to get accurate aerial imagery. I thought it was a pretty clever technique, but in the ensuing decade, drones are commonplace. So nobody in their right mind is looking at kites as a way to put cameras above a flood zone. Unless, of course, they're trying to trick me into a conversation, hoping that, I get excited and I bite. And so I realized, oh my God, I think I'm the next target of this operation. So I'm like, well, I'll bite, but I'll bite wittingly. And we'll see if we can get a meeting of our own. But this time, we'll see if we can turn the tables on the guy who is doing this.
JSR arranges a meeting with the spy, but he also invites a journalist and a videographer to secretly observe the meeting. Then he starts building a hidden camera.
That camera is now here. There's a slight bump, which is driving me a little nuts in the tie, but otherwise, the camera connects to here, and then the battery and recorder lives in a pocket that goes here. And I've taken the battery and recorder and put it in a little sleeve here. Of course, I separated it from its original kind of janky plastic housing and removed the Wi-Fi antenna. So we've got a nice little thing.
New York City. The day of the meeting arrives. With his necktie camera completed, JSR calls a taxi, but then he runs into an unexpected problem.
So I'm in this taxi cab, stuck in gridlock, inching my way towards it. Rain is pelting down. I think I've ruined my necktie camera, and I'm just so concerned that this isn't going to go as planned. And I get these messages from the reporters like, "We're in place, we're all ready, where are you?" So finally, a couple blocks away, I realize, I'm just going to have to get out and run in this wetness. So I try to activate all of the various recording devices that I've taped to myself and have in my pockets, and I jog towards the venue, getting completely soaked. So I arrive at the Swank Peninsula Hotel and make my way to the restaurant, and arrive, and there's the maitre d', and he's like, "Do you have a reservation?" And I'm soaking and sweaty, and I just feel like if there was an A game, I'm on D or E right now. But I say, well, I'm looking for Mr. Lambert. The maitre d' says, of course.
JSR is seated with the spy posing as Michel Lambert. As lunch is served, the encounter of spy versus spy begins.
He's got this pen, and he's pointing it at me as I'm talking, and there's a very clear hole in the cap of the pen. I think it's at the time, there's got to be a camera in there. I think I learned later it was probably a microphone. But what was kind of funny is that during the entire conversation, he had this stack of cue cards. And during the first hour of the conversation, the cue cards were green and the questions were anodyne, mundane. He wasn't really asking me anything particularly sensitive. And then at the 1 hour mark, suddenly it's okay, Then he moves to the more sensitive questions. Then he starts asking about my work at Citizen Lab, and he's probing about my work and about NSO and a few other things. And then he gets to his red cards, and those are really like the focused questions that really seem to deal with the stuff that we do that's the most sensitive. And it becomes clear that this is not really a conversation about my work in Africa. Surprise, surprise. He wants to know what the Citizen Lab is doing on NSO, this spyware company. And moreover, he wants to have questions answered about whether we've investigated the case of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And he also wants to know, by the way, if there might be some racist element motivating the work that we do.
JSR gives the sign, and the journalists waiting in the restaurant descend on the spy and press him on what his real intentions are.
My name's Raphael Satter. I'm a journalist with the Associated Press in London.
I don't have to speak with you.
Well, actually, I think you'll want to, because my colleague was visiting your company this morning, and, it's very strange. She says it doesn't exist.
I know what I'm doing.
What are you doing? It's strange. Your company is not there. We can't really figure it out. Could you...
Please, why are you taking the... You get permission for this?
Sure, we are. Can we ask who you're working for? Can we please know who you're working for? Okay. May we know who you're working for, Gerald?
Of course, that's not the last we heard about him. Very quickly after that, the story broke. And within a few days, the New York Times had his real name, Aharon Almog Asulin, who was a former Israeli intelligence officer and security official who had been linked to Black Cube. And later we learned from Ronan Farrow's book that this was indeed a Black Cube operation targeting me and the Citizen Lab. It's really uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good because you don't know where it begins and where it ends and where this kind of like contamination of surveillance stops. And that taught me a really important lesson, which is I began to feel like, okay, now I understand what the people working with us mean when they talk about the impact of feeling like you're under surveillance. It's a bad feeling. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it didn't seem like an accident that Black Cube is the same company that had been used by Harvey Weinstein to target the women who were part of the Me Too movement, who accused him of sexual assault, right? These people are tools of those who are powerful in those companies that have resources to try to prevent themselves from being held accountable and to stifle dissent and criticism.